This land is Abya Yala, Turtle Island, inhabited by millions of tribes. They're among us. It ain't hard to find. They carry wisdom that shines like diamonds. Their ways are some of the kindest to Mother Earth. The way to life is truth. I hope you find it. Over 10,000 years, they've been living under the skies, from west to the east side. The U.S. school system taught us Hitler. Christopher Columbus is lies. He didn't discover shit. 1492, 1607, they emptied the clips, chapters of genocide. 1865, the U.S. strategically took a huge part of the land that was owned by the Mexicans. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo Heights, property taken, rapes took place, mass killings and mass deportations. My ancestors spoke Nahuatl and they also spoke Spanish. Bracero programs, labor workers have been taken advantage. 1790 to 1965, only free white Europeans were allowed in America. Today, if you look brown and black, it feels like you don't belong in America. All lives matter except the children in the cages. Study your history and read the pages. They have labeled natives savages for ages. Thousands of families are being torn apart. Don't forget about the ones that didn't make it, crossing borders, oceans, riding trains and enclosed freights. Hate should be out of order. They're killing us like desert eagles. The highest warriors for the Aztecs were the jaguar and the eagles. 63 languages being spoken in Mexico, south of the border, that's my people. Funding terror in Latin America, yeah, we made it. Young children incarcerated, being molested by ICE agents. I'm not even talking about climate change yet. Families seeking asylum and refuge, we rip them apart and put their children in cages. We rip your family apart and put your children in cages. School to prison pipeline, there's even timelines. Third graders are being targeted with detention. Over 13,000 undocumented children in detention. Young mothers are being arrested. Many of them with native roots that I mentioned. Butterflies love immigration. Liberty cries, America, open your heart and your eyes. We haven't learned our lessons. We need real history and blessings. Our culture they try to bury, but we are seeds and now we grow like corn and we carry knowledge. The solutions are here ready to unfold like the Pell Grant in college. Solidarity with our brothers and sisters. Some see white and black, I see gold. Generational forgiveness, healing, and love is powerful, I've been told.
Please join me in giving Francisco another round of applause. So by way of introducing this plenary and getting into our work together, I have to roll up my sleeves, good people. See, we came here today to do some work together, and what I want to do is lift up some threads from the opening plenary that are important to weave into this lunch discussion and also throughout our time remaining at this convening. So to begin, it's important to acknowledge both how complex the frame of fixing our broken democracy is, in addition to acknowledging how much we are asking our partners across the room to take on as part of your local opportunity youth work. So in addition to all of your data work, in addition to building out effective second chance pathways for opportunity youth, in addition to all of the cross-sector partnerships, cross-systems collaborations that you have in place, I can imagine some people sitting around the room thinking this morning, and now we're asking and adding fixing the broken democracy to our list as well. And here's what I want to say to all of our partners in the room. What I want to tell you is that the threads of what both Josh and Rashad said, including Rashad's message about this being a multiracial campaign, that centers racial and gender equity and justice, while also ensuring that the people most impacted by the issues are at the center. And actually, another way to say this is the way that I've heard Representative Ayanna Pressley say this. The people closest to the pain are now the people closest to the power. I want to say that that is the work of the people in this room. And you see, our opening plenary was about tactical strategies we can deploy locally to propel our efforts. Because as Steve reminded us in the opening, winning the battle in partnership with Opportunity Youth requires us to win seemingly larger structural issues. And the other thing I want to say is that there's a lot to celebrate across this network. There are so many ways that communities are innovating on pathways to get to better outcomes for the young people we care about. Just this past year, thanks to the work of communities in this room and our partners at Equal Measure, we have a baseline analysis of Opportunity Youth data across our network that, as we pivot into the next phase of our work, will help us not only deepen our impact, but do it with a laser focus on equity, around gender, around race, that will help us have an analysis tied to impact that is unprecedented in this work to date. The other thing is that over the past 2 years, we have seen an amass of $195 million at the federal level. These are resources specifically allocated for Opportunity Youth, and that is thanks to so many people around this room and those of you who couldn't be with us today that have done all of the advocacy work necessary to make those revenue, public dollars, possible. But the thing that I am the most proud of, the thread that I have the responsibility to weave both from our opening plenary and into our plenary discussion this afternoon, is the question about how our collective efforts will impact the future. See, as we gather together in 2019, as we acknowledge that this year is the 400th anniversary of slavery in this country, and we remain deeply aware of the historical injustices our institutions, systems, and policies have gotten wrong, from the taking of land from Indigenous people to the separation of families at the border. We know, both Josh and Rashad reminded us, that the way we fundamentally get things right in this country is based on the actions of individuals. And I just want to say that our network, the Global Opportunity Youth movement that our work is a part of, all of our collective action is part of this story. It will be part of the narrative our country will tell on how we got equity and justice right. We, right now, are writing the future narrative, and it is our everyday work that makes this vision possible. So what I want to do before I welcome our speakers to stage is I just want to acknowledge the great work of everyone in this room. I want to thank you for your partnerships, and I want to just acknowledge our deep appreciation for the work you do daily to bring equity and justice to your system change efforts on behalf and in partnership with the young people we care so deeply about. Thank you to each of you. So now I want to move into this conversation, and I need to invite Justin and Ellie on stage to come and join me, please. As you come to stage, what I want to do is I want to ask you, if you are at a table right now where there are free seats and plates available, please raise your hand. So if there's anybody standing in the back of the room, still keep your hands raised. If you're still looking for a place to sit, you can see where hands are raised. Please keep them raised so we can get as many people in the room seated as possible. Hello? Okay, that's on. All right. So the truth is, our speakers this afternoon, they don't need an introduction. For example, we've already heard that there's a very important ham and cheese story for Desmond to share with us in a few moments. And what we know is that Desmond is the president and CEO of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. And to his left is Cuna, who is the co-founder of New Mexico Dream Team, which is an affiliate of United We Dream. And I cannot get into their bios. We don't have enough time today to honor their incredible work and legacy. And most importantly, we came here to talk about it. So I want to encourage you, as time permits, to look up their bios. But where I really want to start this conversation today, tied to the conversation we had earlier around building a more inclusive democracy, is I want to open up with you, Desmond. And Desmond, what we are all eager to hear is your story. We want to hear about the work that you've done to restore voting rights to 1.4 million returning citizens in the state of Florida.
Well, thank you all for having me this afternoon. I was just sitting here thinking, and I'm gonna let you know right now, I don't like prepare notes. When I come into rooms, I just vibe with the people that's in the room, and I let what they say, the spirit guide me. I was sitting here, and as you was doing the introduction, what I thought about was how I was going to start my story and how significant it was to voting, right? And the reality is that my story, how it started, had nothing to do with voting. And I say that because as a person who has been directly impacted by the criminal justice system, as a person who identifies as a returning citizen, formerly incarcerated person, I know that when we're caught up in the criminal justice system, right, or if I'm in prison, I was not in prison saying, man, I can't wait to get out so I can go and vote. There's a thing that calls life that happens. And that's what I was experiencing in August of 2005 when I found myself standing in front of railroad tracks on a hot, humid day in South Florida. At the time that I was standing in front of those tracks, I was homeless, I was addicted to drugs, I was recently released from prison, I didn't have a job, and the only thing I owned were the clothes on my back. And I stood there and I was actually able to block out that oppressive heat and humidity because the things that were going through my mind was basically how much pain I was going to feel when I jumped in front of an oncoming train. You see, that day I stood there, I was a broken man. I didn't know anything about Democrats and Republicans. None of that stuff was in my mind. Elections wasn't in my mind. What was in my mind was that my parents did not raise me to be in that position, but there I was. I was living in the street like an animal, and I had no hope, no self-esteem. I didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel, and I was ready to end it. Now, I hate pain, but even the thought of the pain that I would have to endure when that train crushed my body was not enough to make me move, and I stood there and I waited and I waited and I waited. I was ready, y'all. I was ready. But apparently God had other plans for me, and for the busiest train tracks in Dade County, for some reason the train wouldn't come that day. And I ended up crossing those tracks, and I walked a couple blocks further and checked myself into drug treatment. And after completing a 4-month program, I moved into a homeless shelter. Prior to that, I was homeless for about 8 years. And while at the homeless shelter, I decided that, it wasn't that I had this big vision about impacting the world and re-enfranchising 1.5 million folks. The vision that I had at that time when I decided to go to school was I wanted to do something to break that vicious cycle of drug addiction. I was just tired of that cycle, and I knew that if I ended up at those railroad tracks one more time, maybe this time I wouldn't be as lucky. And so I enrolled at Miami-Dade College, and I enrolled in the paralegal program. I did extremely well. Ended up graduating at the top of my class and continuing my education. It's coming. It's coming. This timekeeper, you have to give me some time on that. Reclaiming some of my time for these applause.
That's right.
But ended up graduating at the top of my class, and then I was encouraged to further my education, and so I pursued a bachelor's degree in public safety management with a concentration in criminal justice. I figured since I had a lot of experience getting arrested by the police and appearing before judges that would translate into classroom success. And it did. It did. And I ended up graduating with highest honors and eventually getting accepted into law school. And in May of 2014, I graduated from FIU College of Law with a Juris Doctorate degree. You know, and in spite of those obstacles that I was able to overcome, and in spite of a commitment that I had made early on to dedicate my life. Notice I said commitment because we'll get back to it. The commitment that I made to dedicate my life to community service and improving my community, because I knew at one point I caused harm to my community. In spite of all of that, you know, because I lived in the state of Florida, I couldn't even practice law. Right? Because I could not even sit or even apply to the Florida bar until my civil rights had been restored. You know, and I started traveling around the state and just hearing all kinds of stories from all kinds of people from all walks of life, from all political persuasions, people who made mistakes and were told that they would never be an American citizen again. And I say that because nothing speaks more to citizenship than being able to have your voice heard at the ballot box, right? And when you have men, I never forget a guy named Howie. Howie served our country, came back 100% disabled, and was experiencing financial difficulties and wrote a bad check. And the state of Florida told him he would never be able to vote again. And he languished for over 30 years trying to get his rights restored. And just all kinds of stories, and it really moved me. And then I guess the nail in the coffin was when my wife, Sheena, she ran for office. She ran for a seat in our state house. And, you know, I remember we was all excited about her campaign. And when early voting started, somebody approached me and said, man, I know you're going to be excited that you're voting for your wife. And then all of a sudden, I remembered that I couldn't vote. Couldn't even vote for my own wife. But yet I was reading stories in the papers where even prisoners in Puerto Rico was able to participate in the presidential primaries. People all over the country was able to participate, but in the state of Florida, we couldn't. Then when I looked at the amount of people that were voting in a lot of those states, that the amount of people who were disenfranchised in Florida was more than the people who were voting in the states. Yeah. All right, and so I knew that, like I said, there was something that needed to be done. It was a lot of this was in the making, and it just came together for actually, I think, a beautiful symphony of what can happen when we break down barriers and titles, and that's what we did. We engaged in a campaign. You know, I know you guys clapped when we talked about the 1.4 million people who now have a pathway, because prior to Amendment 4, folks in Florida faced a lifetime ban, regardless of whatever felony they were convicted of. Whether you were releasing helium-filled balloons in the air, whether you was disturbing turtle nest eggs, whether you was driving with a suspended license, whether you was trespassing on a construction property, or whether you committed murder, you lost the right to vote for life. And the only way you could have got it back by groveling at the feet of some elected official who happens to be a governor at that time, and hope that he showed enough mercy. And what Amendment 4 did, and it still remains in effect today, and is safely enshrined in our state constitution, was to create an alternative pathway for any American citizen to be able to vote without having to beg a politician for permission. And I think that that was great, but what was even greater than that was how we did it.
Yes.
That was the greatest thing, because, you know, I tell folks that we had over 5.1 million people voted for Amendment 4, and that number reflected over 1 million more people voted for our amendment than any other candidate that was on the ballot.
Yeah.
When you look at those numbers, you see that at least 1 million people who voted for Amendment 4 also voted for our current governor, which speaks to such a broad cross-section of support. And then when you think about the issue of felon voting, and you think about the states such as Florida, and you think about the political climate that we're in, and that we were in back then, where there was so much divisiveness and hate and fear that was just saturating our atmosphere, that we engaged in a campaign that every expert said could not have happened. We engaged in a campaign to where the people that we thought was going to be our opposition became our endorsers. Right? We engaged in a campaign to where we did not ask any politician to endorse. And we told them to stay away because this was a organic grassroots movement. Right? We engaged in the campaign, right? Hear me out. That when 5.1 million people voted, none of those votes was based on hate or fear. They were votes that was based on love, forgiveness, and redemption.
Yeah.
And we showed the entire world, we showed the state, we showed this country that love can in fact win the day. And to me, I think that was like the most important aspect of it, right? Because it showed that we don't have to set up barriers that limit who can talk to us and who we can talk to. That if we really want to solve the issues of our society, then we must be willing to talk to everyone in our society, not just people that look like us and not just people that think like us. We have to talk to everyone because all of us are God's children. All of us are human beings first. And that's what we lifted up, and we elevated that issue above partisan bickering, and we elevated that issue above implicit racial biases and insecurities. And we was able to come together at a place that where we all actually yearn for. And we, unfortunately, most of the time that we're in that space is after a natural disaster.
Yes. Yes.
When people can just come together, right? And I always love to tell a story that you're driving down the road and you come across an accident on the side of the road, and there's someone laying, and you decide to stop. And you get out your car and you run up to that person that's laying on the ground and probably bleeding. Your first question is not going to be, did you vote for Donald Trump? Your first question is not going to be how much money you make.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Your first question is going to be, are you okay? How can I help?
Yeah.
Right? And it's in those moments that we see each other's humanity. And it is in that humanity that we come together and we can move major issues. That was the important thing of this campaign.
Yeah.
So Desmond, thank you. I want to come back to you in a minute, and what I want to ask you to walk us through, because this room is filled with cross-system and cross-sector collaboratives organizing to support our country's most vulnerable young adults to get to better education and career outcomes. And so many people in this room are working with young people who are justice involved, system involved, young people who are also doing advocacy related to immigration reform. So I want to come back to you with this question in a moment of tactically, what were some of those strategies that you used that as our communities are thinking about how can we continue to push this justice issue locally on behalf of the young adults we're working with? What are some of those tactical strategies we can deploy in our local efforts? I want you to give us a sense of that in a moment, but before we do, I need to bring Ellie into this conversation. And I want to do some connections here that are not only setting up Ellie's contributions into this dialogue, but I want to connect it back to what we heard our opening plenary speaker say. When you opened, Desmond, you said exactly what Rashad said earlier, which is that these were not issues that you were experiencing. This was life. And so holding that big frame, when we think about supporting young adults, that we're not thinking specifically about individual issues, but how are we thinking holistically about life challenges, period, I think is one frame that I need to connect. The second thing you talked about that's also really key to our work, and I mean really is fundamentally the vision of our work, is what does it mean to have a second chance system, and that second chance system be comprised of alternative pathways, that we can envision a very different way, as Rashad said earlier, to write the rules, and that we have the power to write rules, and those rules create alternative pathways where more people fundamentally have opportunity. So I also need to call that out as well, Desmond. And then the last thing that I want to say is about this campaign, this organic grassroots organizing work that was so key to what you're doing. Everyone in this room knows the mantra, nothing about us without us, making sure that the people closest to the pain are closest to the power, and what that means for you to be able to do what Rashad said earlier, respond, build, pivot, and scale. So I want us to hold those pieces in our mind as we pivot to Ellie, who again is doing organizing work, supporting youth organizers on the forefront of immigration reform. Ellie, please tell us about your work.
Thank you, Monique. And damn, after he talked, I was like ready to jump and then say like, amen, I'm ready. But I want to share that when I'm hearing you, I remember why I joined the movement, right? Why I joined the movement. I was undocumented, really, really afraid. I was 16 years old in Capitol High School in New Mexico. I was too Mexican, too broken English, too everything, right? And I didn't know how I navigate and how to say people that I was undocumented, because during that time, you were not as open. Mm-hmm. You were like, I don't have papers. Can you find me the fake Social Security to continue working? That was it. That was our system. That was our underground system. And that's the system that continued in place. Okay? So I remember really well that I was in that classroom, and I was feeling really ashamed of who I was. I don't understand why, but I know why. Because the systematic racism that exists in a school setting every single fucking day that you're walking, just entering those doors.
Yeah.
At the moment that you cannot even eat lunch where the rest of the people eats because you need to stick with your people, because then it's gonna be fights. Because you know that you are an ESL class and you need to stay in the portables because you cannot go inside the building. That is the system that is still in place, right? And that's the system where our young people live. So our dreams, our envisioning, our hopes are limited to that classroom with a broken book, with a chaotic classroom, and with limited resources. So when I was there in that classroom, and when I heard for the first time a strong woman with accent, brown, beautiful, and super queer, calling out and saying, no papers, no fear, I say, hell yeah. She's calling me. She's calling me. She knows something, right? She knows something. And for the first time at my 60 years old, I was able to figure out that it was okay to say, I'm undocumented, I'm unafraid, I'm unapologetic, I'm queer, trans, and unashamed. And that is the moment I joined the movement. That is the moment when I feel for the first time that I have power, I have choice, I have agency. And that is the reason why when I'm hearing him, I was like so chill, because I'm like, it's no, you don't join the movement because you want to change a policy. You don't join the movement because you want to change the politicians. You join the movement because you are committed to reclaim our humanity. You join the movement because you know this is a fucked up system. That you know it. And you know that the problem is not on me. That I'm not the one that needs to be fixed. And when you embrace that with young people, we know that we share the struggle and we're closest to the pain. But also we know that we have the answer of who we are in the absence of a struggle and fight. And that is when transformation and miracles happen. And that is when we change the system. And that is when policy change. And that's the way how we like to just share like the impact of our work. Young people is really, right now, when I'm saying, I'm gonna break it down in 4 ways, right? Young people have dictated, we have power. We have agency and choice. In some way, the undocumented folks have filed the fierce amicus brief that is going to be heard in November 12th in front of the Supreme Court saying, you, Trump, you don't going to take away my victory. That was DACA. I want that. I want it taking over offices. I want it doing walkouts. I want it putting my body in the line. And we cannot vote, but we can speak. And we can talk with people, and that is our power. Second impact that we have, we know that we need to invest in local infrastructure. There's no way that we will win if we don't win locally or statewide. There's no way that we are not able to address the lack of grassroots infrastructure that is in the ground. Not everybody lives in urban settings. There's rural areas. There's tribal countings. There's places where we need to connect with our poor people, that we need to tell them that they have the power. And it's like and they are so amazingly courage and brave that they are able to see the connection of every single issue. They see, I want education, no deportation, and for that, I'm gonna mobilize all my high school to allocate $25 million to Affordable Education Act. That happened in New Mexico in 2018 legislation session. Where the most impacted people is young people that live in the reservations, that live in the border towns, that are brown, that are black, and that are native. And those were the most directed impacted young people, right? Reclaiming that victory. The third piece that young people has been really intentional to do is the power shift. We know that our stories matter. So when our stories matter and we knock those doors knowing that I may not be able to vote, I'm so fucking good organizer that I'm gonna make that person vote. And that was real. In Doña Ana County in New Mexico, border town, where you have the colonias, you have a so hard time to just even knock those doors. We were able to talk about let's stop deportation, let's close detention camps. Or kids that look like us, your kids that look like me, that are in your home, are in cages. And for the first time, we changed the narrative in the border. And people, we turn now 15,000 people in a border region, pledging and saying no more. We want to flip the district, and we won in 2018. We flipped the district from being a stronghold Republican to become the first woman of color, Xochitl Torres Moll, to be part of a really progressive narrative. And she has things to work on, like everybody. That's why we take over offices and we change ourselves in those offices. But that's the part of the direct action, no?
Yes.
And the last one, and the most important one, and I think our young people knows it, and they have it in their core, and in the way how they move, and in the way how they chant, and in the way how they are bringing joy to this revolution. Because if this revolution you cannot dance and be joyful, then this is no revolution no more. This is oppression Olympics. And that shit doesn't work. So when those young people are in that setting, and when those young people are able to see the humanity in each other, cross-movement happen. Cross-movement happen because they have the creativity and the imagination to say, who I am outside of this. And that is going to inform the policy change that you want. And that is going to inform the system, like how we need to tackle those systems, right? And that's the way how we need to really more intentional in our campaigning to do cross-movement. We are right now running an APS campaign. It's Albuquerque Public School campaign. It's Count Us All. That is really about, right now, the allocation of Title I funding is supposed to be for brown, black, poor kids, okay? And they are using a system that is given by the data federally. Who do you think is left out on that data? All the undocumented folks do not qualify for federal programs, and all the native folks who do not apply for those kind of programs because they are in the tribal infrastructure. So proportionally, we are invisibilizing brown and black folks in the education system. And it's just the systematic racism that exists. It's so silent, but it's right there, reminding us that you do not belong. But what happens is when you empower young people and they're able to see it by themselves because they're living it in the classroom and in their lunch, they're telling you, I'm not receiving the resources, what's up? Now you are saying like, oh, they are intentionally left you out. So they organize themselves. So this is a campaign that is totally led by young people, right? Because they realize the funding that the schools are receiving has lacked totally, and they wanted to know why. So this is like a little bit of how the power of building movements and keeping the directed impact of folks at the strategies and the core in developing the narrative, in developing the tactics is so key. And our young people are so wise because they know what they need and they know how they envision living this life without chains.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you for so powerfully articulating the power of building the movement. In walking through your core strategies, what I was reminded of is the message from earlier about how we need to be very clear about our theory of change in this movement. And I feel like that is essentially what you have just articulated with the effort that you're doing to support youth leaders. So the next conversation I want to have with both of you is about the intersection of justice reform and immigration reform. You know, in the field we talk about it as crimmigration. But before we do, Desmond, I'm going to come back to you to ask you this question, this follow-up question. When we think about what our communities are doing and the tactical strategies around being able to deploy and implement a campaign that achieves the level of success that you were able to achieve, what are those 2 to 3 tactical strategies you would share with the room about how to think about supporting people that are justice involved?
Wow. So I'm kind of like caught up in what Ellie just presented. I mean, because it really took me way back, and I'm sitting up here and I'm listening to her talk about the youth movement. I'm looking at all these young faces and I'm feeling so old right now. But and I think it would get to your question. When I had while I was in the homeless shelter, I enrolled at Miami-Dade College. And probably within a few months after enrolling, one of the first group of people that I really connected with was Gabby Pacheco, Carlos Roa, Felipe Matos, and they was talking about putting together this. They wanted to walk from Miami all the way to Washington, D.C. To talk to President Obama about immigration reform, and we have formed a friendship from way back then and started to really, as a matter of fact, a lot of the things that we use in our campaign, I admit, I got from the immigration movement when, you know, these young folks was like, well, maybe I can't vote, but I'm gonna talk to some people who can. And I cannot allow any consultant or any national person to tell my story.
Yeah.
I have to tell it myself, right? And those things, which unknowingly, I think, because like I said, I didn't have the idea of a ballot initiative then, but those things were part of the DNA of understanding that if change is to come about, it have to come about by the people that's directly impacted, which goes to, I'm gonna answer that question about Rashad, right? About with commitment and a contribution, you know, and so, because sometimes I tell folks that sometimes we get confused between commitment and contribution. And what I've used is a ham and cheese omelet to use as a way to, you know, so you could tell a difference. And talk about the ingredients of a ham and cheese omelet. There's actually egg, ham and cheese, and if you're poor like me, growing up, we used a little milk to stretch the eggs out a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, I see some kindred folks up in there. And so we knew that the eggs came from the chicken, the cheese and the milk came from the cow, and that the ham came from the pig. Well, the chicken made a contribution to the ham and cheese omelet. The cow made a contribution to the ham and cheese omelet. The pig, he made a commitment to the ham and cheese omelet. And what that speaks to, though, and contributions and commitments are both good, right? But we have to be clear with what we're doing, whether we're engaging in contributing to something or committed to something, right? And those that are committed to something, those who are contributing need to support those who are committed, because those are the ones, those are the people who are giving their lives. And it happens to be the people that's experiencing the pain is most invested in eliminating the pain.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about a temporary a reprieve from the pain. We're looking for a permanent reprieve from the pain. And so while others may think that this is a good thing to do, it's the end thing to do at that moment, right? They could easily, like the chicken could drop the egg and continue on to something else. The cow could stop for a minute and let you milk it, continue on to something else. But people like us, we can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
We're faced with this reality every single day of our lives. And as a result of that, it is so important when you talk about tactical. What to me, the most important tactical decision is to make sure that the people who are experiencing the pain, right, have a say in how this pain is going to end.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
Because, you know, I use my wife as an example. You know, we're driving in the car and she tells me she's hungry, right? And in my head, I'm thinking I want to take her to this nice fancy restaurant, right? Or this place where I know that have good ribs or whatever. And then she tells me she's hungry again. And I'm like, we're almost there, but we're passing all of these food places, right? And then that third time is not pretty, y'all, right? By that third time, I'm like reduced to this much right here. And I'm told how insensitive I am and all of that kind of stuff. And she was right. In spite of the fact that I love my wife and I had this vision of this beautiful place that she was going to be able to get rid of her hunger and quench her thirst. The reality was that I was not experiencing what she was experiencing, and I didn't know the urgency that she was having. In spite of how much I love her and care for her, I could not actually live in that space there. She could.
Yeah, that's right.
And I had to learn that when she said that, honey, I'm hungry, the next thing should be me pulling over and getting her something to eat, right?
Lesson learned.
And so I think that that is a very good tactic. That's what we use. Even when I think it was just at the time saying that we had at the time 1.54 million people in Florida who couldn't vote, right? But we looked at a state where elections was decided by 60,000 typically, and then for presidentials, 100,000, you know, just thinking that, man, if just half of returning citizens could get someone, a family member, a friend to vote on their behalf. Hence, what I didn't know at the time, I was telling people, I wasn't organizing around political lines, I was organizing around bloodlines, right? But it's deeper than that. I was actually organizing around love.
Yeah.
We was mobilizing people who cared for us, who may not have otherwise been engaged in the political process to step into the arena on our behalf because they cared for us, right? And so not only are we keeping directly impacted people at the center of the movement, but we're using the power of love to engage a dormant class of citizens and voters to rise up, right? To bring together a massive outshowing of civic participation to actually shift landscapes. So those are the two things that I would use.
Thank you. So, Ellie, I want to invite you to respond to him. But I want to also turn to the audience and say that we want to also hear your questions, and we want to invite you into this dialogue as well. So after we hear from them, I want you to know in the next couple of minutes, I'll open it up to the room. So please get your questions ready.
Yeah, and for me, I just want to build it up of what he's saying in the fact that as a movement leaders, we also have a lot of work to do, right? Saying like we get well, I'm undocumented, una from immigration right movement, that's my line, right? But moving out to be really cross movement is about seeing each other humanity and not as a competition, but an interconnect of liberation. And that means also that my commitment is put my resources and challenge my theory of change and challenge anti-indigenous, anti-blackness in my staff. That is what it means. That it means that I need to address homophobia in my own staff and my own organizers. It means that I need to do that work, right? So I remember the historic victory of Florida because I was formerly the National Field Director for United We Dream during that time. We have our biggest Congress in Miami, and we make a conscious decision. This is crazy, but we're gonna use this moment and we're gonna mobilize the 1,200 young people here to knock doors for Amendment 4.
Yep.
And we did it. And it was, right now I still have PTSD because of that. And I just kidding. It was the liability forms, the chaperones, it was a chaos, but it was beautiful because young people were able to connect. They were able to see, yes, I'm fighting for DACA. I'm fighting for stop the deportation of my parents. My mother is right now in a detention camp, but I care about Amendment 4. Because if you are not free, I'm not free.
That's right.
Yep.
And it's simple like that, and that implies in movement building, intentional leadership development, intentional political development from the young age of young folks, an investment on them. Because it is the society who has limited us to see each other. But I think where it's rooted in love and hope, miracles happen, is what it happens, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I wanted to share, and that's our role as a leaders and in this space to challenge ourselves in those biases and prejudices to really connect with each other.
Yes. Could I just share? Cause that was like, like we vibing here, y'all. I don't know if y'all know this, right? We vibing for real, But and so I want to encapsulate that because it was, I don't know how long ago, maybe about 8 months ago, where that thought came to me that, wait a minute. We don't have a monopoly on the suffering, and we definitely don't have a monopoly on the solutions.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
Understanding that it goes far beyond, I recognize the suffering that I'm enduring, but that doesn't mean that I have, that it's only me that's suffering or people are suffering my way. I mean, there are people that's still incarcerated right now that's going through some things that I don't even have a clue about or haven't experienced, and there are people that have actually come out from incarceration who have felony convictions that are going through things that I may not have gone through. And so I don't have that monopoly, right? I don't have a monopoly, and I don't have the solution, monopoly on the solution as well. Yeah. And I think it's very important to stay grounded that way, to understand that there's so many voices that need to be in this.
Yeah, that's right.
So thank you. I want to open up to the network, and I want to see, show of hands if we have questions in the room.
Not everybody at once now, please. No, don't rush the mic. We only have one mic.
Hi, guys. Thanks for being here. Look straight down, Desmond. Way down here, over here.
Oh.
I'm actually sitting in your seat. That's why. Thank you both for being with us. This is really, you are vibing. I wanted to ask you about the get out the vote part of the work now, and how you're going to leverage that love and that proximity that you've been able to achieve to win the victory of reenfranchisement. But now what's the plan? We know Florida, there's small margins on the governor's race, on the Senate race, on the presidential. It seems like I heard something about hanging chads back in the day. So tell us about your plan now that you've won. How are you going to get out the vote? What does that look like? What are your targets? I'd love to hear about that.
Well, first of all, I want to tell you, we cover the gap. That's one of our taglines. We cover the gap. You know, in spite of legislation that's out there, we know out of 1.4 million people, at least 840,000 of those individuals does not have any outstanding fines and fees and are eligible to register right now. That's 840,000 in a state where a gubernatorial election was decided by 30,000 votes, right? And so when you talk about how we do it, I think that we have to get in the mindset of being less transactional and more transformational, right? That I am not asking you to register to vote because I need you to vote for a politician that I like, right? Or I'm not asking you to register to vote because I want you to support an issue that I think is important to me, right? No, I'm asking you to register to vote, right? So you can exercise a voice that has been silent for so long to address your needs, right? Wherever they may be, right? And what we've seen, and this happened during we stumbled on this during our petition collection phase and through our GOTV phase. There's nothing more powerful than empowering the people in their own communities to talk to their family, friends, and communities about voting. Yeah. When you have an issue where in prior gubernatorial elections, you have over 2.7 million people of color. I remember 2010, there was 2.7 million people, no, not 2.7, but 1.7 million. It was 808,000 registered African Americans, 912,000 registered Latino Americans who registered to vote but did not participate in an election decided by 63,000 votes. 4 years later, after there was a whole lot of dialogue about how this governor is the worst governor in the history of the state of Florida, and how he's managed to piss off so many constituency groups that he was going to be a one-term governor. And I say that because it's almost the identical narrative or rhetoric that we hear now.
Yes.
Yeah.
So 4 years after that, he wins again.
Yeah.
And this time, he doubled the support among African-American voters, right? He won by 63,000 votes, but this time, over 1.3 million African-Americans that was registered to vote, and 1.1 million Latino Americans who was registered to vote did not vote, right? And what we believed was that there was a direct connection between many of the people who couldn't vote to the people who could vote but didn't vote.
Yeah.
And we tried this, and what we seen was when we looked at all voter propensity that we focused on, and primarily our primary focus was on zero propensity voters, but we also focused on mid-level propensity voters. What we seen in the midterm election was that there was a turnout rate of 68%. But when there were one person in that household who was a returning citizen, the turnout rate was 82%, right? And so we are thoroughly convinced that the best messages to turn out people to vote are people who were silenced for so long and now have the opportunity to vote, because they're the most authentic messages about how the right to vote is so valuable and how we honor that right by actually turning out to vote and having our voices heard. And so that's our strategy: have returning citizens engaged in the VR process, have returning citizens engaged in follow-up and continuous engagement of returning citizens, and then have them be the catalyst within their own communities to turn their family, friends, and communities out, not for the presidential, but turn them out for state attorney races, for judicial races, turn them out for sheriff races, turn them out for public defender races and local council races, because we believe in the trickle-up policy. That if they come out for that,
Yeah.
then it's going to show up at the top of the ticket.
Yeah.
But we need to have them come out for something that they can connect with.
So I think we have time for one or two more questions, but what I want to do quickly is knit just a couple of themes together. You know, again, this bigger question around how we continue to win on the Opportunity Youth front is tied to some of these structural issues in our country. The connection that I want to make, that I know many people in the room are thinking about, is the way that we mobilize young people. When we're thinking about our re-engagement strategy and we're trying to figure out how do we even find where young people are, it is the young people from communities that tell you where their peers and friends are. It is the young people that are the messengers, that are the ambassadors that say that this program works, that you can trust this adult, that this college is ready for you. And they are the ones who, because it is a trusted friend and peer that has brought them into it, they are able to then collectively move forward together. So while it might seem like some parts of this conversation are disconnected, I want to be really clear that they are not only connected, they are very strategically connected.
Yeah.
Because our Opportunity Youth work at its core is around the way that young people self-organize to achieve the vision and mission that they have for themselves. So we can take these lessons from Ellie, we can take these lessons from Desmond and think about how do we continue to create spaces where more young people are able to mobilize to get to better education outcomes, career outcomes, but also this question about justice reform, youth justice reform, and being on the front lines of immigrations. All of these lessons are transferable, and it feels really important to call that out. And the thing that is most important, actually, the frame, I think that holds all of this together, is what Ellie said, that you join this movement to reclaim our humanity. And we know at the core of this that that's what drives our young people. So, Ellie, yes.
Yeah, I just
please do.
wanted to say, build it up in that, because it is true. To win, we need to engage young people. Though they are the new borders bloc, and nobody's putting attention to them, and mainly young people of color. They are right there, right? Ready to throw down and ready to say what they need to say. And they have the energy, because when you win, you need to keep those motherfuckers accountable. And they have that energy to do that. And that's the real, because they can promise everything in the electoral rail. They can promise the stars and the moon and everything. But when they are in power, we have the responsibility to keep them accountable, right?
That's right.
And we need to remember them, that our community put them there with a purpose. And as well, we can take them out. And that is the power, the truth to power, that we need to really engage our young people. And I wanted just to share that, because it is really important. And also, civic engagement is no cycle. It's not just when there is electoral moments. It has to be issue-based campaigning. You need to engage and educate your people every single opportunity. And that is the way how we reclaim our government, our democracy, because we have been defranchised to understand all that. I didn't even know what a city council was about until I took action in one of them, and I was like, oh, it seems like it was important. And then I figured out they passed resolutions that are important. But it's things like, I was so young, but I knew that I have to do something to the target. Then you start learning about power analysis. And young people are in that, right? They just know that they need to act.
Yes.
It's our responsibility how consciously, political consciously, they will act for the upcoming generations.
Thank you. So do we have any questions from anyone in the audience?
Young person. I want
Right here and right
we
here.
go.
Yeah. Well, and we'll come here next.
Hi, question for both of you. How do you see mobilizing with the upcoming census count?
You can answer that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you answer that. Well, everybody needs to be counted. So I think mobilizing for the census is one of the most important efforts that we need to do in every single decade, because this is going to have a ripple effect in redistricting. And when we don't have a say in redistricting, we lose power, and our people continue being invisibilized. So if the question is, we should be involved in the census, fuck yeah. We should be, that should be our priority in our campaigning, yeah? And young people should understand why. Young people should understand when something that I have been learning, because right now we're doing the strategy for census and redistricting. Young people get like they're like, okay, you want more allocation of funds, you want more like more money to the schools. They get it, but that's not what they motivated. When you talk about census being a way to reclaim your voice and have a participation in the political game, they get agitated. And they say, yes, I want that because I want to be heard and I want to belong. And I want to have a say of how these things is going to run. So that's where people get like a really agitated, right? So yes, we should be, all of us, be part in our programming. Census should be part of your programming, and you should encourage people to count every one and single one of our folks.
Thank you. So yeah, I think we have 2 questions over here, and I want to encourage any of our young leaders in the audience that has a question to speak up as well.
Hi, thank you for all that you've been sharing. I don't want to stand, I'm 6'2", so you can see me sitting down. My question is, from an organizing standpoint, when we're trying to really mobilize young people, particularly 18 to 24-year-old voters, which is an untapped voter block, one of the challenges that we face is that they're often dealing with dire and urgent other needs. How do you recommend engaging, like it's hard to ask young organizers to go out and get stuff done when they don't have food, don't have housing, work. So what strategies do you use to keep them engaged and address those needs so that they can go out and get it done?
Yeah, for us, we have been really successful creating infrastructure in their own school, after-school programs and programming to run it in a way that also is clubs. So they have a student club, they have an after-school program, and also we are creating the social-emotional learning curriculum, where like I noticing that you're getting it, yes, that thing works. Yeah, it works creating those tactics in the system, educational system, because now they even are engaging to the automatic voter registration that we already passed in New Mexico, so they are becoming the enhancers and catalyzers on that. Because it's a difficult population to even know where they are living, because they move a lot, more the college students. So I'm about creating a new block of voters. The best strategy is to target high schoolers that are going to college, because they already has a household and is more, they are more like a solid in some of the, you can have more control in the factors that are around there in the school using those programs.
So could I just add to that? And so one of the things that we're looking into that we've actually already started is that we're pre-registering. So in Florida, 16 and 17-year-olds can pre-register to vote, and as soon as they turn 18, they're getting their voter registration card in the mail. And so we're getting school districts to actually agree to participate in programs like that. But the biggest thing I want to tell you is very simple. Build it in your budget. It's just that simple. Build it in your budget.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Even
Jesus had to feed the multitude before he taught them, right?
Yeah.
All right, so build it in your budget.
Hi, good afternoon. I really appreciate everything that you all have said today. And one of the things that really resonated with me is that you both mentioned the need that these movements and these initiatives need to be intersectional, inclusive, and integrated. Right, and so, and Ellie, you mentioned, like deconstructing the oppression Olympics, right?
Yeah.
And so, one thing that I'm curious about, from your perspective, personally and organizationally, what are some things that you all do and incorporate into your practices in order to really deconstruct some of these issues, particularly around transphobia, homophobia, and integrating them into these movements to really ensure that they're intersectional?
Yeah. So. For us, I'm gonna be really hashtag real talk. The work needs to be in us first. Ooh. So I need to build that intentional relationship with my Black community, my trans community, and also with our Native folks. Like it has been really intentional, right? For me in New Mexico, that I have to create intentional, deep relationship and friendships. It's not about just go to my protest this day and this workshop. No, we have relationship as humans. I go to the sweat lodge with my brothers and sisters. I go to the barbecues. I go to the posadas. I go we share what is our culture because that's our identity. And it's no stereotyping. It's who we are. We are someone beyond organizing and fighting all the fucking time. I'm worried about the posada is coming in my home. Like all the family in my home is gonna be, and I have to be ready for make the food, and I gonna invite my family. It has to be less ethnocentric in the way how I see it, right? I'm an immigrant Mexican woman of color. So when you push yourself to see family beyond that, when you learn from each other and the stories, and when you share the culture of who you made you feel and who you are beyond what it has been given of political identity, because that's true. We are talking and we mobilize and we navigate with a political identity, but that is not entirely who we are. So that is the biggest homework and lesson learned that you have to bring, right? And also, as a queer woman, is really intentional in every single moment in the space. I have to talk about gender non-conforming, and I have to talk about queerness, and I have to talk about who I am, and I have to request people to identify themselves with the pronouns. And I request in my building and in the building where we have our office to be gender neutral. And those are how you use your situation of power to make the changes. It's not that I'm imposing something, it's the fact that I have the responsibility to change my settings as a leader and also as an organizer. Now, not all the people are there. Yes, it is true, but it's also our work. I'm not telling you it's your work to deconstruct other folks. It's not your work to do the anti-racism for them. No, I'm not telling you that. But it's definitely my work to call that out. So it's something that it has to happen. We love respect. But it seems so genuinely when you already build intentional relationships as a family with them.
Thank you, Ellie. Yeah, we'll close this out before, this will be the last comment before I wrap us up.
Yeah, because I definitely don't want to avoid that question. That was, that's a real, actually a real thought-provoking question, which I don't have all the answers to. And all my answers are not going to be right, but it's going to be authentic.
Yeah.
I was born in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands. So I was born a U.S. citizen, but my brothers weren't. They were born in Montserrat, right? And a few years back, my brother died. And he died because he was homeless, and I didn't know it. He was homeless for quite some time, for several months. And he had medical issues, and he was scared to go to the hospital because he thought he was going to be deported. And when I finally found out he was on the streets, I actually went and got him, and I got him into a shelter and was able to get him medical attention, but it was too late. And he died 3 days later. But that experience reminds me that so often we ourselves, we draw these barriers that make people think that, okay, immigration, that's a Mexican issue, and criminal justice, that's African-American issue, right? And we're thinking that we're fighting these different fights on different fronts and not even stopping to understand that, first of all, in immigration, there's so many black people that are impacted by immigration. And so it's not a Latino issue. Yeah. It's not a Mexican issue. It's a human rights issue. It's an issue about humanity, and same with criminal justice. Right. That yes, African Americans are disproportionately impacted. We know that, we understand that. But we talk about it in such a way that make it that we're the only person that are criminals. So when we think about crime, we only think about black people. When I close my eyes and think about it, black man with dreads and gold teeth. Yeah. I'm even doing it. I'm even visualizing this. Yes. And what that does is that we actually cause the separation amongst ourselves You know what I'm saying? And not looking at each other as just human beings and understanding that these systems impact us all, whether they're white, whether they're black. As a matter of fact, they impact white people as well. There are white people that face unintended consequences for policies that was directed at just people like me or people like her, right? And the reason why other people get impacted is because those policies are inhumane. And because they're inhumane, they will eventually affect all of humanity.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Right? And so when you talk about how do we come together, and I think, Ellie, you said it right, we start internally and understand that, guess what? Your issue is my issue and my issue is yours.
Yeah.
I believe that's why Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated.
Yeah.
Because he brought the Latinos and blacks together around the economic, argument.
Yeah.
And it was no longer just a black thing, right? And that's when it became dangerous. Because when you look at the numbers, we have more than enough to dictate the policies that we want to see.
Yeah.
But guess what? We allow ourselves to be divided. And even when we're only by ourselves, we end up dividing ourselves up, right? And we can't get nothing accomplished because we're too busy infighting.
Yeah.
So we start internally, and so that's what, how do we do it? Listen, I'll just look at you first, and the only thing that I see when I look at you is I see another child of God. I see another human being that deserves to be treated with dignity and respect.
Thank you. So thank you for reminding us of not just how intersectional these issues are, but how they have impacted generations. And unless we do something, they will continue to impact generations. So what I want to close this with is I want to lift up Representative Elijah Cummings, who I think many of you know recently passed away. There was this quote that went around. Many people said this was their most favorite thing that they heard him say. And I think it deeply connects to this work. What he said is that our children are the living messengers we send into a future we will never see. And what I want to acknowledge and thank you both for is the fact that you are preparing a better future so that when our messengers show up, they are ready and the future is ready. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
So I'm going to transition us now into our forums, and then after that, we'll go into our afternoon and evening activities. We will reconvene here tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. We hope you all have not only a wonderful, safe evening, but a warm evening as well. Thank you all for being here with us.
Thank you so much. That was great.